Welcome to Women and Resistance, a powerful podcast where we honor the courage, resilience, and revolutionary spirits of women across the globe. Hosted by Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, we uncover untold stories of defiance against systemic oppression. Whether colonialism, racism, sexism, or economic injustice. From historic icons like Winnie Mandela and Fannie Lou Hamer to today's trailblazers, we shine a light upon those shaping a more just world. This is a call to honor the past, embrace the present, and build an empowered future. Yes, greetings. Welcome to another episode of Women and Resistance. And tonight we are looking at the red activist, Claudia Jones. And who is Claudia Jones? We are going to find out in a series of conversations about who she is and try as much as possible to tie her life and times to our current times and see what sort of lessons we can learn from her. So with me as usual is my co-host, my sister from another mother, Fubara Eneli. Welcome, sister. Oh yes. For what's the crime again? For having dangerous ideas and sharing dangerous ideas. Mm.
Share this broad vision, this seeming weakness has been resented, or more kindly, if not resented, rejected. Whereas this characteristic has impinged on personal relationships, it has nevertheless served as a liberating force, making and shaping the being that I have become. I, in turn, have rejected any tendency to reduce this result, even perhaps to stifle its evocation. Evocation is a mutual emotion to evoke a response of togetherness in all things. But maturity tells me this is probably impossible in a single relationship. And remembering human limitations, there must be togetherness. Togetherness also is not an abstraction. Its inner laws and contradictions must be studied. And you might be wondering, why would I be writing in this way? You know, I was once married, right?
Yeah. Really?
Years.
To whom?
Abraham Schlonig, but he will remain a footnote because that's not what is important.
A footnote.
I intended to marry again. There is speculation as to who. Some may say Howard Stretch Johnson. I don't respond.
Mm.
There is so much more that I can share that I wrote, but I will end with this. I have never been able to condone personal weakness, and therein perhaps is another antagonistic contradiction. Fundamentally, regarding the impermissibility of personal weakness, not entirely lacking in my own share of these, I seek to counter my own and others with a harshness that is also impermissible in close relationships. For most of my adult years, this has been the essence of my approach. I find I have been praised for single-mindedness of purpose, and this is true enough. Only my sincerest friends have observed the one-sidedness of my existence. Something, again, the characteristic rears its head, I have hardly allowed myself to admit, far less to fully examine. Perhaps a third reason, happily I do not publicly avow or practice this characteristic, root has been a protective one, a general personal injury. Those who truly know me know this, and I have often, even as I strike back, the verbal flows from which I flee are nourished in an identical soul. Fearing the perpetuation of this one-sidedness in personal relation, I persist in it, fearing the disappointment of non-togetherness, knowing that evocation of a different approach means change on my part, and yet I have no certitude that change will strengthen togetherness. Penchants that I have for introspective discussion, I seem to have wound up where I began. I bore no one but myself. I have admitted nothing, but sought to analyze all of this for self-understanding. I find I have deluded myself. Conscious though I am, that delusion is unrealistic, can never replace togetherness or evoke happiness, nor even sympathetic friendship or understanding. And as I become too aware of this state, the state in which you find me today, I don't even want to try to change. I realize not only have I become lethargic in these matters, a state not to be emulated, but positively without nerve. All weavers know of tangled skeins, the bad thoughts that then becomes threads to deceive. Sometimes they can be untangled, and sometimes they serve as webs. How I believe the loom of language and in the family of man. But you did not come to hear my
Musings.
You did not come to see any sense of vulnerability that I might show. This was something that I actually never did. And so as I prepare, let's talk about the Claudia Jones that you have come to hear of.
Yes.
I was born on February 21st, 1915, in Belmont, Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. I still have fond memories. You know, my mother's family, they were landowners, and my father's family, they owned hotels. And then cocoa prices dropped, and our area was thrown into this tailspin economically. And like many other people from my area, my parents left for the United States of America to try and make a better home. They left me and my 3 sisters behind, but we knew they were going to send for us. Of course, we were all excited about this great America that we've heard of, though we hadn't seen. On February 9th, we arrived with my Aunt Alice Glasgow. She brought me and my 3 sisters to New York. It was a wondrous journey, not the most comfortable, but we knew we were going to a better place, and that excitement and getting to see our parents again was all that mattered. We arrived on the SS Voltaire in New York City. My sisters Lindsay and Irene and Sylvia. What is this strange place? It looked nothing like home. Quarters were squalid. My father initially had a job as an editor of an West Indian newspaper. But remember, this was also during the Depression.
Jim Crow.
And we soon found ourselves, I suppose, better off than some. My father got a job as a super for a building, so he basically is the one who fixes up everything. And we lived in the basement, damp, with a sewer running. You could basically say right through our quarters. My mother worked in the garment industry. Long, arduous hours. We were always happy when she would get back because there were always stories of fires and people who had been hurt, women falling out from sheer exhaustion. I must get ready for my event, so you must pardon me as I tell you this story.
Before you go further, I notice you introduce yourself as Claudia Jones, but records shows that you go by a different name. You are listening to Women and Resistance with Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, where we honor the voices of women who have shaped history through courage and defiance. If you're finding these stories inspiring, take a moment to subscribe, share, and support this platform. Together, we amplify the voices that deserve to be heard. Now, back to the conversation.
Well, I was born Claudia Vera Cumberbatch.
So,
But you have to understand that it's important to pay attention to where you are and what's going on.
okay.
And to protect my family, because my choices did not have to be theirs. I chose a fairly innocuous name, Jones. And you know what? The FBI amassed over 870 pages of surveillance on me. My writings, where I went. I guess.
Why do you think they took an interest? Why do you think they took an interest in you? Considering you're just...
I was getting to that part. Same reason I'm now getting ready to go to court to hear what this judge has to say about my sentencing. Well, so well initially did I hide my origins that it took the FBI 5 years to figure out that Claudia Jones was Claudia Vera Cumberbatch. I did it to protect my family. So, I get to this country, and like all other kids, I suppose, I enroll in school. I attended the Wadley High School. I was active in the junior NAACP. I studied drama at the Urban League. I performed in Harlem and Brooklyn. Listen, I come from a proud people. My parents, no matter what economic situation we found ourselves in, which was similar to what even the native Negroes in America were experiencing, the racism, the discrimination. Can you imagine teachers at my school, as classes are being dismissed, asking the Negro children, would you like to wear a pretty apron today? You know what they were asking? They wanted us to come and serve at their parties as servants to make an extra buck or two, because they knew just how destitute we were. They never made those same offers to the white students. That is the environment in which I was supposed to cultivate my mind. But because of who my parents were and what they had taught me, I knew I was more than what they were trying to make me be. I was a great student. I loved words. I loved language. I was 18 years old when my mother, Sybil Minnie Magdalene Cumberbatch, Nee Logan, died. She just plain slumped in her place at that garment factory. She had meningitis. Not too long after that, with my father struggling to raise 4 girls on his own, I was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and I spent a year in a sanitarium. That is how it was back in those days. Most people who got tuberculosis died. There was no treatment. We did not have the antibiotics that you have today. But you know what? It wasn't all bad. They had to give us fresh air and nutritious food, I guess. They were trying to prevent the spread of tuberculosis. There were others there. In fact, there was a Jewish girl there who needed a blood transfusion. And I was a perfect match. And all the other white people there were so concerned about the mixing of black and white blood.
Interesting.
Take it or leave it. You need my blood to live. And so we had the blood transfusion. And the white people there waited with bated breath to see what happens when black and white blood mixes. They were expecting her to turn black. A young Jewish doctor came and spoke to the whole group and tried to break down the science of it and tell them how silly and misguided they were. You know, my father always says a woman is never fully dressed without her necklace. I survived the 1 year there. Some would speculate that I would forever suffer from the lingering effects of tuberculosis and its impact on my lungs and my heart. I went back to high school. I excelled, but I did not go to my graduation.
Why not?
I was scheduled to get an award at that graduation. I had been a great student. Me, the granddaughter of landowners, and the daughter of a woman who worked in a garments factory. I had nothing to wear. I cried my eyes out that day. There's so many ways that discrimination, racism impacts the lives of, call us Negroes, call us Blacks, call us Africans. We feel it in a very different way than most other people. I did not go on to college. I did not have the money for it. And quite frankly, I needed to help my family. And so I worked a number of jobs. I worked at a laundromat. I worked at a factory. I worked at a millinery. But I loved to use my mind. And those mundane tasks, day in, day out. You know, in one of those jobs, my job was to take a toothpick and to put this putty in this little nail hole all day long.
Yes, yes.
And then in the streets of Harlem, oh my gosh, it was bustling with life. We were suffering financially, but you can't keep our spirits down. And there were people talking and sharing information and educating. These speakers on the corners. And this was about the time with the Scottsboro case. Did you hear about the Scottsboro 9?
Yeah. The framing up.
The framing. So before, I know in your day and age, long after I had made my exit from this world, you all have something called the Central Park Five, which became the Exonerated Five. But before them were the Scottsboro 9. Young boys, the youngest, I believe, 13. Riding the trains and trying to find work. These racist officers accused them of raping 2 white women. They were going to kill those boys. At the same time, I was learning about what was going on with Italy and Ethiopia. What is wrong with these people that they can just not let us live in peace? And I started to see the connections between all of these lives, my life, the lives of my parents, the death of my mother. At 37, what is it to be a young woman without the presence and nurturing of your mother? And that's when I discovered the Communist Party. They impressed me because they made persuasive connections between the struggle against fascism overseas and the race. And Clarence Norris of the Scottsboro Boys was your uncle. These are our stories. But they're not just stories, and that's why I allowed you to see me in a way that most people never saw me when I was alive. Stepping out of my house, I allowed you to see me. Me, Claudia, Vera Cumberbatch, the 8-year-old who came here with so many hopes and dreams, came to the United States of America. But what the Communist Party showed the connections between the struggle against fascism overseas and the race and class oppression that I was experiencing right here. And guess what? It was the Communist Party that funded the defense of the Scottsboro 9. Now, I knew about the NAACP because, as I told you, I had been a member of the junior NAACP. But on this case, they were nowhere to be found.
Why didn't they take up the case, though?
Well, there are all kinds of reasons that have been put out there, some of which had to do with race and a concern of speaking up in defense of Black boys who were accused of raping white women. I don't know if they thought that would cause their supporters, their Jewish and their white supporters, not to fund them anymore. I'm not really sure. I do know, and History shows that the NAACP repeatedly made some very bad decisions, in my opinion, including putting out a man who would become my mentor, W.E.B. Du Bois. I joined the party in 1936.
So the height of the Second World War.
Yes, I joined the Young Communist League, and I was assigned to the youth movement. See, they had a system. They had a system of educating us, of letting us, making sure that we understood what communism was really about. I was a fast learner. By 1930, I had become the associate editor of the Weekly Review and the secretary of the executive committee of the Young Communist League in Harlem. I was employed in the business department of the Daily Worker, and I attended a 6-month training school of the Communist Party. There are different ways to get an education, but I knew I had to get my mind going. I knew that was important to the work I wanted to do. By 19, I was the New York State Chair and National Council member of the Young Communist League. I attended the National Council of Negro Youth, the Southern Negro Congress, the National Negro Congress, and I visited the American Congress. And it was also this year that I filed preliminary papers for U.S. citizenship.
So how did that turn out?
They turned me down. At this time, there was no real reason given, and certainly the fact that I was part of the Communist Party was not yet an issue as far as I can tell. But they denied it. In 1940, I married Abraham Schlonick. I divorced him in 1947. I had work to do. In 1941, I became the educational director of the Young Communist League. So in 5 years, I went from joining the party to being the educational director. 1942, aggressive surveillance by the FBI on me began. Of course, I did not really know this at the time. In 1943, I was the editor-in-chief of the Weekly Review. In 1943, I also became the editor of Spotlight, American Youth for Democracy. I held that position until 1945.
End of the Second World War.
A lot of thinking, a lot of writing, and a lot of talking to people with whom I could have these conversations and engage in ideas, and to think about how we put these ideas into action for the liberation of people. Socialism, we knew, was the cure. As I stated, I divorced him on February 27, 1947, just a few days after my birthday. And I became the secretary of the Women's Commission for the Communist Party of USA. 1948 was an interesting year. I was arrested for the first time. Because there were to be many other arrests. On January 19th, and I was imprisoned on Ellis Island under the 1918 Immigration Act. Ellis Island, the same home
tourist spot
of the Statue of Liberty. And do you know the history of that statue, of that woman? Do you know about the broken chains
at the
by
feet?
her feet?
Yeah.
That are not often shown. And if this is a new story to you, well, here is an invitation to go learn more. I was imprisoned on Ellis Island and released on a $1,000 bail, January 20th. $1,000 bail back in 1948. At that point, I was threatened with deportation to Trinidad. They weren't going to silence me, though. I spoke at a May Day rally in Los Angeles. I was assigned by the party to work with working class and Black Party women for peace and equality. Because of this, I was clear. There was no liberation for the whole if half of the world was being exploited. And for Black women, for the Negro woman, for the African woman, she was super exploited. Because it was an issue not just of class, which is what the Communism Party, the Marxist theory, that focus was on class, but it was class, it was gender, and it was race.
Race, yeah.
These weren't just things I knew academically. My mother died at age 37, slumped in her workplace in the garment factory. That year, from 1948 to 1949, I traveled to 43 U.S. states, many of them in the South, the Black Belt. It was to inform an essay that I later wrote, because I truly believe that the Negro in America is a nation within a nation. Well, the deportation hearings began. But guess what? They got so frustrated because they could not get anyone to testify against me. So temporarily they dropped it while I continued with my work. Some may say this is maybe about the time that Lorraine Hansberry and I met. We were actually roommates for a while. We know she got married to her husband in 1953, and I was married up until 1947, and she didn't move to New York until 1950. So somewhere probably between 1950 and 1953 when she got married would have been when we were roommates. In 1950, the deportation hearings resumed on February 16th. I continued with my work. Undeterred, I was appointed alternate member of the National Committee of the Communist Party USA. I gave a speech in March on International Women's Day and the struggle for peace. And if you have not read that yet, I do humbly beseech you to read it, because everything I wrote and talked about in 1950 is still relevant today.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
And I must say that it breaks my heart to say that, because the certitude that I had for our future did not include this continued super exploitation of my kind so many decades after my transition. This speech that I gave on International Women's Day was later cited in the court papers as an overt act, and it led to my second arrest on October 23rd, 1950. Again, I was held at Ellis Island under the McCarran Act, and then detained at New York City Women's Prison November 17, and finally released on bail on December 21st. And again, I was served with a deportation order. But I will not be silenced. I believe it was Zora Neale Hurston who later on wrote that if you're silent,
you've accepted what has been done to you.
No, they will say that you enjoyed it. I believe Audre Lorde reminded us that our silence will not save us. So in 1951, I spoke in Harlem while on bail. That singularness of purpose, the same thing that may have cost me that evocation, those meaningful, intimate relationships with people. And as you can imagine, I got arrested again on June 29th under the Smith Act. This time along with 16 other communists, and this time my bail was $20,000.
$20,000.
The date was July 23rd, 1951.
1951, $20,000.
The deportation hearing continued. From 1952 to 1953, I served on the National Peace Commission at the end of to end the Korean War. On January 1953, I was convicted under the Smith Act, and I was sentenced to 1 year and a day and a $200 fine. Some of my comrades got longer sentences. I believe that I got the sentence that I did due to my health. As a matter of fact, at the end of my trial, before my conviction, I suffered a heart attack. I suffered heart failure, and I was hospitalized for 21 days. And again in December, I was hospitalized again and diagnosed with hypertensive cardiovascular disease. It was 1953. I wasn't even 40 years old. As a matter of fact, I was just a few months older than when my mother died. But you can't silence me. Black women think, and we write, and we speak. And in 1954, I became editor of the Negro Affairs Quarterly. 1955, I was imprisoned in the women's penitentiary in Alderson, West Virginia. They took me in on January 11th, 1955. You know who else was there? Many people had been there. There were many young Negro girls there. That was also the place where they held Billie Holiday.
Wow. The thread is now.
I was released on October 24th after numerous petitions for health reasons. But you know, even while I was imprisoned, I taught a young girl how to play piano. I took their weaving classes and their pottery classes. Art has always been important to me. And just like when I was in the sanitarium, I made the most of those experiences. I spoke with the other women who were there. I collected their stories. My sentence was commuted for good behavior, and my father actually came to get me, and I traveled back with him from the prison to stay with him in his home. This was 1955. I was hospitalized at Mount Sinai Hospital following a heart attack, identified as exacerbated by the conditions of my imprisonment. How many imperialism, colonialism, racial discrimination, how many have been killed? My deportation was ordered on December 5th, and I left for London on the Queen Elizabeth on December 9th and arrived in London on December 22nd. I'm going to pause for a few.
And so when she got to London, she experienced a harsh reality of what the face of colonialism attempts to hide away from the world, which is when you come to London, you're going to not just be at the bottom of the barrel, but you're actually going to be underneath the barrel. And so she was met with signs like no dogs, no Irish, no blacks allowed. And she also faced the problem that the Communist Party over here were, in her words, afraid of the power of a black woman. And so she had to do what she is known for, which is organize around her interest. And organize she did. So the question would be, what was the motivation thereafter coming from the United States, thinking, well, you said it, that I need to continue the work. What was it about London?
So much to cover in so little time. Well, as I said, my people came from Trinidad and Tobago. That's where I was born. But Trinidad and Tobago was still a colony of the British, and there was much agitation going on the islands at that time. And the colonizers were very concerned about having someone of my stature and with my organizing experience on the island. And so they refused to allow me to entrance to my own homeland.
Yeah. That was
and
under the...
They figured that London
You'll be
would
troublesome.
give them a greater opportunity to keep an eye on me, and I would cause less trouble. It's the thing they always do, which is marginalize us, which is to discount us. I want to share a little bit about what I shared in court on the day that I was convicted. And I'm going to tell you, I was sentenced, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my trip to London and then what happened. Again, I encourage you to go read this for yourself because I cannot share everything with you in this time, but just a little snippet of my statement before being sentenced to 1 year and a day by Judge Edward J. Dimmock. I say his name, so if you ever see his gravesite, you know what to do. Your Honor, there are a few things I wish to say. For if what I say here serves even one whit to further dedicate growing millions of Americans to fight for peace and to repel the fascist drive on free speech and thought in our country, I shall consider my rising to speak worthwhile indeed. Quite candidly, Your Honor, I say these things not with any idea that what I say will influence your sentence of me, for even with all the power Your Honor holds, how can you decide to mete out justice for the only act to which I proudly plead guilty, and one, moreover, which by your own prior rulings constitutes no crime? That of holding communist ideas, of being a member and officer of the Communist Party of the United States? Will you measure, for example, as worthy of 1-year sentence my passionate adherence to the idea of fighting for full, unequivocal equality for my people, the Negro people, which as a communist I believe can only be achieved allied to the cause of the working class? A year for another vital communist belief that the bestial Korean War is an unjust war? Or my belief that peaceful coexistence of nations can be achieved and peace won if struggled for? Another year for my belief that only under socialism will exploitation of man by man be finally abolished and the great human and industrial resources of the nation be harnessed for the well-being of the people? Still another year sentence for my belief that the denial of the exercise of free speech and thought to communists only proceeds as history confirms the denial of the exercise of these rights to all Americans, etc., etc., honorable judge. Of course, your honor might choose still another path for sentence. You will no doubt choose as the basis for sentence the concocted lies which flowed so smoothly from the well-paid tongues of stool pigeons and informers who paraded before you here and gave so-called evidence, which the court has christened as amply justified. Amply justified? Indeed. This evidence, there was no official stamp powerful enough, Your Honor, to dignify the obscenity of this trial of ideas. Hence, for me to accept the verdict of guilty would only mean that I considered myself less than worthy of the dignity of truth, which I cherish as a communist and as a human being, and also unsuitable to the utter contempt with which I hold such sordid performances. It was in an American junior high school where I first learned of the great traditions of popular liberty of American history, for which I then received the Theodore Roosevelt Award for Good Citizenship. That I have learned to interpret that history and to work to influence its change for the betterment of the people with the indispensable weapon of Marxist-Leninist ideas. That is the real crime against me. Of all other charges, I am innocent. It was here on this soil, and not as Mr. Lane would depict to this court as a young child of 8 years of age-waving revolutionary slogans, the absurdity of it all, that I had early experiences which are shared by millions of native-born Negroes, the bitter indignity and humiliation of second-class citizenship, the special status which makes a mockery of our government's claims of a free America in a free world for 15 million Negro Americans. It was out of my Jim Crow experiences as a young Negro woman, experiences likewise born of working class poverty, that led me in my search of why these things had to be, that led me to join the Young Communist League and to choose at the age of 18 the philosophy of my life. The science of Marxism-Leninism, that philosophy that not only rejects racist ideas, but is the antithesis of them. I cannot share everything with you, so I'm going to end with this. It was the great Frederick Douglass, who had a price on his head, who said, "Without struggle, there is no progress." And echoing his words was the answer of the great abolitionist poet, James Russell Lowell. The limits of tyranny is prescribed by the measure of our resistance to it. If out of this struggle, history assesses that I and my co-defendants have made some small contributions, I shall consider my role small indeed. The glorious exploits of anti-fascist heroes and heroines, honored today in all lands for their contribution to social progress, will, just like the role of our prosecutors, also be measured by the people of the United States in that coming day. Concluded, Your Honor.
And concluded she did. Because
so I get on this Queen Elizabeth, and you had to get dressed up every night to go down for dinner
Of
and
course.
lamb chops and chutney sauce, and it was quite amazing. Did you know I write poetry? I wrote quite a few poems while I was on the Queen Elizabeth. Poems about the water and messages coming to me. Yes, I did. And before I left on this boat, because back then we had to travel by boat, over 350 of my friends and comrades actually saw me off. We had a party at the St. Therese Hotel in Harlem. You know, I've been so serious since we started. What you haven't seen is the joy that I typically have. I always enter the room with laughter. You know what the FBI had in their files? They actually said, she is tall, 5'9", quite attractive, and she had these dimples, just
Dimples.
like you.
But you have to give it to them, though. They have a good, keen sense of observation for them to notice the difference.
Well, I was hardly a wallflower, but it was with great sorrow that I left New York City. It was truly the only home I could remember, really. It's where I had been for 32 years. And I was leaving everyone I knew and my aged father behind. I was deported in 1955. I was hospitalized soon after I got to London, 1956. And shortly after that, my father made his transition. And I could neither go for his funeral or to assist in his burial. I had no money and really nowhere to stay. I stayed with friends, and it became a stay where I was as anxious to leave as they were for me to leave as well. That is never a place where a woman of my age wants to be. I went to the Communist Party in Britain, expecting to be embraced, particularly given my work as a member of the Communist Party and a leader of the Communist Party in the United States of America. I was rejected by those old fuddy-duddy white men. Not just those who were in the professional ranks, but even the working class. They wanted nothing to do with this Negro woman who came in there with ideas, because a Black woman should not be able to think or speak or write. But we had work to do. I embraced my people, the West Indians, and soon after that, we founded the West Indian Gazette. Is there anything that you would like to add before I continue with my story?
Yes, actually, the West Indian Gazette was not only a paper that, in the traditional sense, but it was also an informational tool. It was an informational and educational tool, because what they did was they invited writings from the community, people who were not trained journalists, that, okay, bring your stories in, we'll help you brush it up and put it out there. And that birthed more and more journalists within the West Indian community. But I want to go to something. She wrote a piece, an essay titled An End to the Neglect.
Who is she?
Claudia Vera Cumberbatch Jones, because we have to call the full name. And she wrote a piece titled An End to the Neglect of the Problems of the Negro Woman. And in it, she said, and you will see the correlation with history, the bourgeoisie is fearful of the militancy of the Negro woman, and for good reason. The capitalists know far better than many progressives seem to know that once Negro women begin to take action, the militancy of the whole Negro people and thus of the anti-imperialist coalition is greatly enhanced. Historically, the Negro woman had been the guardian, the protector of the Negro family. As mother, as Negro, as worker, the Negro woman fights against the wiping out of the Negro family, against the Jim Crow ghetto existence, which destroys the health, morale, and the very lives of millions of our sisters, brothers, and children. Viewed in this light, it is not accidental that the American bourgeoisie has intensified its oppression, not only of the Negro people in general, but of Negro women in particular. Nothing so exposes the drive to fascification in the nation as the callous attitude with which the bourgeoisie display and cultivate towards Negro women. And you saw this play out in the last election in the United States. So when she said, I wish to imagine the future, was this the future she was imagining?
Come from a long line of women who know our role as divine beings. And beyond me, there will always be other women, African women, who also tap into that same understanding. So whether we talk about Sojourner Truth, or Harriet Tubman, or Queen Nani, or Queen Amina, Queen Njinga, we have a long history. We can go back to the beginning of humanity, and it starts with us. So do you ask, is it the future that I envisioned? The future I envisioned was one in which women could rightfully be who they were designed to be, where we were not exploited in the ways that we still are. And though I am sad to see where we are, I am gratified that my daughters have kept that fight going. And it is a fight we will win. Of that I am certain. So coming to London as a now middle-aged woman with a heart disease, a new place, I have now migrated, if you will, forcefully and not, twice, had an even deeper understanding of how interconnected we all are. And so with my work, and as I advanced the ideas of Marxism and Leninism, my idea was to really help people understand how everything was connected. And with the situation, the experiences that people of West Indian descent were experiencing in Britain, helping, and many of them were shocked by the experience they had in Britain, because growing up in the West Indies, they had been told they are subjects of the Queen. They had been told this was their home country, as absurd as it sounds now. They really believed that coming to Britain would be a great thing for them, just as my family had believed we were going to the land of milk and honey, if you will, in the United States of America. And many of them were quite frankly shocked by their experiences in Britain. But showing them the link between colonialism and imperialism and capitalism, and how socialism would be the thing that frees us. And so when the racist communist party in Britain rejected me, I embraced my people. And we went to work organizing. Our goal was it for the Gazette to become a weekly paper. We never quite got there, but it was a monthly paper. We struggled many times with getting it out. But the idea was to make sure that we were educating our people and we were connecting us all. And so we had stories about what was happening in the different islands of the Caribbean. And we had stories about what was happening locally. And then we had stories of what was happening in the United States. As a matter of fact, you know, when they had that march on Washington, we marched as well in London. I had over 1,000 people who marched to the U.S. Embassy in London, showing the solidarity, showing how we are connected, showing how our fight is won, because when they divide us, they can conquer us. I also met another man that I was to work with, although that relationship too was fraught with some issues. But again, that is just part of my life and the choices that I made. So in London, I became affiliated with the Caribbean members of the Communist Party of Great Britain. I joined the West Indian Forum and Committee on Racism and International Affairs. I worked in various organizations in London, including the Caribbean Labour Congress. Do you know that the Communist Party in Britain did try to find me a job, but it was a menial job? Again, nothing that would use my great acumen. There were days when I went hungry. I had friends, my friend Miss Johnson in the U.S. was trying to gather funds and send me some funds. She reached out to another man that I considered a comrade, Ben Davis. If you read my papers, you would see that I wrote extensively about him and the way he was prosecuted, because he too was imprisoned for his ideas. This work is not for the weak of heart. There's a lot of heartbreak. There's a lot of sacrifice. I'm being very vulnerable with you all tonight. When Darlene Johnson spoke to him and said, we need to help Claudia, she is struggling financially, he said, the party has exhausted most of its funds with all of these court cases, and she just has to figure it out. I would never have said this. I didn't write it anywhere, but I'm thinking it. How quickly we become dispensable. In 1957, I co-founded the West Indian Workers and Students Association because we must work with the youth. We must work with the youth. We must get their attention and engage them while they're young. I became active in a variety of ways against racism, immigration restrictions, and the oppression of the Caribbean community in London, and apartheid in South Africa, because we're all connected. This fight is one. I founded the West Indian Gazette. Later, it became the West Indian Gazette and Afro-Asian Caribbean News. I was the editor for the West Indian Gazette and the Afro-Asian Caribbean News, and active in political organizing of Pan-African, Caribbean, and Third World communities in London. We needed to all come together in solidarity. At this time, Britain still refused to allow me a passport. I could not travel. In 1959, we organized the first London Caribbean Carnival at St. Pancras Hall. Perhaps you, as a Black male, would like to share how that carnival came about, the incidents that occurred right before that carnival, and call his name.
The carnival itself was a combination of, I have to be careful how I say this, 32-year-old Antiguan carpenter was coming back from work around midnight on May 17, 1959, at a place in West London here, Notting Hill to be exact. And it was accosted by white fascist youths, and they proceeded to attack him and stab him, and he was laid out. He bled to death.
Kelso Cochrane.
Kelso Cochrane is his name. I was going to call his name, but Kelso Cochrane was his name. And the beautiful thing about Kelso Cochrane's passing was the day he was going to be buried, London stood still. In fact, the entire neighborhood came out to say their goodbyes to him. The fall and the positive side of his passing was what will now be known as the largest street party in Europe, the Notting Hill Carnival. So that carnival stemmed from Miss Jones's efforts to bring people together, and that is now a constant on the London calendar at the last bank holiday of the year, which is the last Monday in August. West London turns into one huge party. But, that's aside. But the downside of that, again, if we're peering into the future as she wants us to do, is that there was a movie that was done a couple of years ago. The movie was titled Notting Hill as well, starring Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant. When we talk about erasure, that film was set in a Black neighborhood. Imagine a film being set in Harlem, in Atlanta, in Dallas, and you do not see a Black person on screen. Not even an extra. That is the kind of erasure that we should not allow stand. And I think we'll do her memory justice by continuing to scream out that fact. We would not be erased.
Clearly, I agree with you, because many of you are just hearing about me for the first time. Here in the United States of America, very few wrote about me, despite my work. I guess it could be considered another kind of othering. I have always been clear that the same issues we're dealing with at the local level, we see at the national level, we see at the international level. They're all connected. And the only way we win is solidarity across these arbitrarily drawn geographical borders. We must address issues of class. We must address issues of gender. We must address issues of race across the globe. So I never had children of my own. But when that young man was killed, and with marauding gangs of white men going all through the few neighborhoods where we had been pushed into, the fear that gripped the West Indian community, and even for every other Black person, people were afraid to step out, and the police did nothing to protect us. And finally, the Jamaicans,
Yep.
they took up arms, and they said, we are going to give as good as we get, and we are going to protect our own. And many were imprisoned, but it changed things. But I understanding the importance of joy and understanding that art is the genesis of a people's freedom, I said, let's come together and celebrate our culture and celebrate who we are and get beyond all of these racist ideas that about Black men and how they were violent and how they were going to attack white women. The same tired story. And many were in opposition to that idea. Carnival? How trivial is that? It gets worse, because as part of the carnival, we were going to have a beauty contest. We are communists. We deal with ideas. We should not be engaging in things like that. But my people, a people's art is the genesis of their freedom. We need spaces of joy. We need spaces where we can remember and celebrate who we are and call up those things that have been so suppressed. Because let me tell you about the life of a Negro in America at that time. Let me tell you about the life of a Black person of anyone of African descent in Britain at that time. We had no leisure. It was the Black tax. We paid 4 times the rent that a white person would pay because we couldn't even find places to live. And they could just gouge us. And so all we did was work. You know that stereotype you guys use nowadays? Jamaicans work 10 jobs. Where do you think that comes from? We were just trying to live. And I saw my people in pain. I saw mothers scared to let their children out of their sight for fear that that would be the last time that they would see their children. We had to turn it around. And that's when I suggested the carnival. And no, I did not do it alone, because I never work alone. We always organize. We always bring people together. And we came together and we created that first indoor carnival. And that carnival took place every year until the year that I died. 65. That I was buried in January, and that carnival was supposed to be in February. It was temporarily canceled. But thank you. They still held Carnival, but it was in August of 1965. But let me wrap up really quickly here, because you can read about me. You know why? Because finally I'm not erased anymore. I want to say a big thank you to Carol Boyce Davies. I want to thank my friend Donald. There are people who have started to write about me, even essays that have been put together by people like Gerald Horne.
Yeah.
And I don't say this because I think myself so lofty. I say it because I learned from the people who came before me, and you too should study and learn from what I did so that we're not always starting again from the beginning. We can build on what has been. In 1961, we had the Afro-Asian Caribbean Conference, organized in part by the West Indian Gazette, which led to the formation of the Committee of Afro-Asian and Caribbean Organizations. In 1962, I finally get a passport, and I visit the Soviet Union as a guest of editors of Soviet Women. You cannot imagine my delight until you read the poem I wrote about this, because here was the heart of communism. I got to visit schools and study developments in healthcare. But I also ended up being hospitalized. I returned to London on November 21st, 1962. But I wasn't done. In 1963, I also got to travel, met a lot of women, including, this was at the Women's Congress, including Ransom Kuti, and many others. Yes. And I pause. There's so much that I'm remembering at this time. 1963, again, I visited Soviet Union, this time as a representative of Trinidad and Tobago to attend the World Congress of Women. I organized with a committee of Afro-Asian and Caribbean organizations, and we had the parallel march on Washington to the U.S. Embassy, as I told you. 1964, I worked with the African National Congress to organize hunger strikes against apartheid, to boycott South Africa and for the freedom of political prisoners such as Nelson Mandela. I participated in protests outside of the South African Embassy in London, all the while with my heart weakening. I spoke at a rally with novelist George Lamin and others on April 12th. I met with Martin Luther King in London on his way to Oslo to collect the Nobel Peace Prize. I also met with Kwame Nkrumah and with Jomo Kenyatta. I wrote my last editorial in the West Indian Gazette and Afro-Asian Caribbean News about King's visit. I gave a speech in Japan as a delegate to the 10th World Conference Against Hydrogen and Atom Bombs. I served as vice chair of the conference drafting committee, proposing resolutions in support of liberation struggles in the so-called Third World. I traveled to China as a guest of China Peace Committee, and I met Chairman Mao. I also got to interview Sun Ching-ling, the wife of Sun Yat-sen. This was all very taxing on my body. I returned to London, and on the eve of December 25th, I died, they say, of heart failure. I was in my bed with my reading glasses on and my reading material. My partner at the time was out of the country, Abihimanyu Manchanda, known as Manu. But the fact that you are even exploring me today is in no small part due to him as well. Because he kept my papers.
Yep.
He married. He named his daughter after me. And his wife, Diana Langford, kept my papers, found my papers, and kept them after he died. And it was due to her efforts that Carol Boyce C. Davis was eventually able to get access to my papers. And now my papers are at the Schomburg in New York City, back in the city where I was raised and where I spent most of my life.
Yeah, but for
much
people...
much has happened since then. I'm just going to end with this. As a matter of fact, just in December 2023, Nubian Jack Community Trust put a blue plaque outside of the house where I used to live. It's 58 Lisburn Road in North London, in the borough of Camden.
Yeah.
There have been many other honors, if you will. Like I said, my papers at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, they held a symposium on me in 1999. Carol Boyce Davis published a book called Left of Karl Marx.
Left of Karl Marx. Why?
Kind of have
Why the
dueling thoughts about the title of the book? Well, because I was a communist and I absolutely, my entire life, believed in the Marxist-Leninist theory. I would say, though, and as you read my work, that I went beyond Marxism and Leninism as they had it. I believe that I had a more encompassing view of what it would require for us to truly have socialism. I died at age 49, and I would like to believe that had I lived longer, my ideas would have continued to evolve. And I, like some other people of African descent who were once communists, but then disavowed communism, may eventually have come to that point. Although many of the people writing about me right now will disagree with it.
True.
So, Left of Karl Marx is because I am actually buried at Highgate.
Yeah, just about 6 miles away from me, literally around the corner.
I am buried to the left of the 11-foot bust of Karl Marx.
You can't miss it.
I finally have a little headstone. I guess it could be an honor to be in that position. And yet there's a part of me that believes that while I claim communism till my death, as you read and analyze my work, I should not be in the shadow of Karl Marx.
True.
In life or in death. There's also another book that is out. There's so many actually that are coming out now.
Internationalism.
And this one is called Internationalism in Practice. Claudia Jones, Black Liberation and the Bestial War on Korea. And there are quite a few people who contributed to this, including, of
Gerald
course, I
Horne.
mentioned Gerald Horne earlier. And there are other little books that, have information about me. This one is The Heart of the Race, Black Women's Lives in Britain. And this one was written by Beverly Bryant, Stella Dadzier, and Susan Scaff, forward by Lola Okolosie. And there
are multiple books on her, but those two, Internationalism in Practice, Claudia Jones, Beyond Containment, those two are, the first go-to, because this is essentially all her writings. This is written about her.
So I do want to share just a few last words, unless you have other questions for me.
No.
At my, did you know this? So I was supposed to go to a party on Christmas Eve. And the reason they came and found out that I had transitioned was because I didn't show up for the party, because I was the life of the party.
Yeah.
Now, there was actually a struggle over my body. So a certain group of people that were affiliated with Mao decided that my body belonged to them. This is what happens when you are cut off from your family, alone in a whole strange place. And I did my best and I worked to create family. In fact, one of the criticisms about our newspaper was that we weren't professional enough, because it became a place where people just stopped in and they shared their stories. I was like a godmother to so many people. And some of the workers felt it wasn't professional enough. But you have to create spaces for people to be human. And so they first were going to take my body. And Manu had to go to court to get an injunction to have access to my body. And then, of course, he orchestrated my funeral, and I was buried on January 9th, 1965. And it was a very cold day. But over 400 people showed up, and there were messages from all embassies from all across the world. They sent their dignitaries. I think my parents would have been proud to see this young girl who contracted tuberculosis because she lived in such squalor, fettered at this level. Of course, there's a part of me that wishes they had made my living a little easier than just celebrating my accomplishments after my death. But how do you move on? My daughters in particular, and my sons as well. Only through organization, education, and struggle against reaction, against war, profits, against fighting back against anyone who would try to push back on our civil liberties, fighting back against all the times that they try to limit us under the guise of war emergencies. That's always when they come up with more of these punitive things. Did you know that in the United States of America, anyone who wants to become a naturalized citizen has to take an oath that they have never been a member of the Communist Party?
Yeah.
Even that you don't even know anyone who's a member of the Communist Party. Isn't that crazy? That is how they essentially attempted to kill the Communist Party in the United States of America. And since then, you all have had you keep coming up with the war on drugs, the war on poverty. Then you had post 9/11 and all of that. And each time you have these things, you erode the rights of people. You must fight back against this through organization, through education, and through struggle. My life was a life of struggle. Too many sacrifices, maybe not too many, but a lot of sacrifices. But I think so many of you are so wedded to your comfort, too comfortable to study, too comfortable to organize, too comfortable to struggle. Only the abolition of imperialism of the whole system of the war makers will guarantee peace for you and for any peoples in the world, and women in particular, whose children have to go off to war and be killed. We must be at the forefront of this fight. How do we do this? Fight the war every inch of the way. Don't give up an inch. Don't let them take any ground. Fight, fight, fight. We believe that our ideals can best be achieved by socialism, by establishing a new social order in which the working people will own and control all the vast resources and means of production and use them for the benefit of all the people. You got to fight. You got to study. You got to organize. You got to fight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And again, before we go, and I should bring up the name of Claudia Jones, who would hand over the baton to, next week, the Mother of Africa, Mariam Makeba. So next week, it's going to be turn of Mariam Makeba in the chair. Again, I must thank Sister Aya for bringing her bricks, her hair, and multiple personas. Hopefully she doesn't have to get into the chair and go and see. But
I might already be seeing one. No, but seriously though, Adesoji, thank you so much for this opportunity. Again, for those who are just catching this, all of these are based on a book that I'd started writing before the pandemic. And then my brother died, and that threw me for a loop. And then other things. Adesoji was like, let's do this. Let's tell these stories. And I never intended that I would be doing hair or anything, but literally these women are just like taking over. I refuse to try and do their accents. Some of them have been trying to get me to go practice. I'm like, no, this is it. I'm not. First of all, I don't even have time. But we appreciate everyone who's watching. We do ask you to like, to share, to leave comments. We do believe that these women's voices need to be heard. Their stories need to be known, and that they're very instructive for the times that we live in. So if you're enjoying this, hopefully you're also learning from it. Hopefully you're also being inspired by it. Please like, share, subscribe, download the podcast, all of those things.
Yep. You heard it.
And yes, next week, Mama Africa,
Mariam Makeba. And she also has great stories, So all these women they're exceptional. And they embody the theme of this podcast, which is them being women and offering their resistance in their own little way.
And all of them harassed by the authorities.
I mean, that's a given.
Many of them dying young, and many of them dealing with the shenanigans of Black men who don't know how to support Black strong women. Yeah. Y'all need to get it together.
All right. Okay, on that very happy note, until next time when we talk Mariam Makeba and Sister Aya.
Thank you again. Thanks everyone for watching and for listening.
And it's good night from me. Good night and see you next week. That is it for this episode of Women and Resistance. Thank you for joining us in amplifying the voices of women who challenged injustice and change the course of history. Be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. Together, remember, we honor the past, act in the present, and shape the future. Until next time, stay inspired and stay in resistance.